It's chaos.
It's a different type of Sunday scary.
It's your newest obsession.
It's Dirty Driving, a Formula One podcast.
We're the Hornsby sisters. I'm Katie.
And I'm Megan.
Yeah. Hello, everyone.
We are here. We are awake. We have not recovered.
We have simply not recovered. I was in an Uber this morning on the way back to the apartment to record, and he's like, "Oh, getting an early start to your day," and I was like, "Yeah, I gotta go record my podcast." He's like, "What's the podcast about?" I'm like, "Formula One," and he's like, "Oh, blah blah blah." We start talking about it. It's like a quiet, slow conversation. Then he's like, "Who's your favorite driver?" And I'm like, I always say what I always say, like, it depends on who hasn't pissed me off this week. And but I was like, Lewis is probably like all-time favorite if I had to choose. And he was like, "Yeah, gotta go Checo." And I don't want to make any assumptions on where he's from, but he was like, "All my friends just went to the Mexico City race, so I assume he's from Mexico." And then we started talking, and I was like, "Oh, he didn't seem like a huge fan of like watches it every weekend." So when I was like, "Oh, there's some big tea around Checo this week," he was like, "Oh, what happened? Tell me." And so I got a little warm up for the episode, and I can't wait to talk about literally everything that happened. There's so much to discuss.
Well, I had the exact opposite experience prepping for this episode. Literally the exact opposite. You had a wonderful experience. I had a negative experience. I was in Dallas for my layover, which should have been 40 minutes, but it ended up being like an hour and 45 minutes or something. So I'm sitting there, I have my laptop covered in stickers. And I'm just kind of minding my own business, reading about the Checo drama, really trying to dig into this whole Monaco situation. And this dude walks right past me, like stops, turns around, kind of like backs it up, looks at me and goes, "Who's your favorite driver?" Doesn't say hello, doesn't say hi, how are you doing? I said, Lewis Hamilton, hands down. But why wouldn't it be?
Yeah.
The guy straight up looks at me and goes, "You're one of those new fans," and walks away.
What a dick.
I was like, who shit in your Cheerios, buddy? Like, what? We could have had this awesome F1 conversation dude, I know you had a layover. Everybody had layovers. Everybody was delayed. Everyone was annoyed. We could have sat here and chatted about F1, and you just decided to be a little asshole. Move along with your day. Move along.
Also, Lewis has been racing since 2008, so how would you know if I'm a new driver or not?
It was like the dumbest statement. I just didn't even know what to say. It was just so funny that this has happened, like literally after we had talked about Emma, about all of these like just stupid things. Like, dude, there are probably like only 2 F1 fans in the lounge, and you decided to piss the other one off instead of engaging in an awesome conversation and really working through the trauma that was Brazil.
Yeah, it's just disheartening. Also, I just did the math. It's 14 years that Lewis Hamilton has been in Formula One. So
clearly not a new fan. That's more than half my life.
Wait,
that is half my life.
That is half your life in March. I would have.
I just let it go. I was like, whatever, dude. Like, I don't even, what am I supposed to engage? It's so funny. I was like, we could have just talked. Like, you could have been like, "Yo, I like whoever." And we could have like literally had a pre-practice recording of the episode, debriefing of Brazil. It's just so, I was like, did anyone else, like, it felt like I was in the Twilight Zone because no one else acknowledged that this bullshit had just happened. And I was just like,
that's some shit.
Let me go back to reading about whether Checo crashed intentionally or not in Monaco. How many times did I watch that video? 30. to hear his throttle to try to figure it out. And I don't know what to think about the whole thing. Like, dude, you could have sat here and watched this with me. I know you didn't have the exclusive Wi-Fi password.
Yeah. Oh, I hate that. I'm so sorry that happened to you.
I mean, it's fine. It was just funny. I was like, oh my God. But it's okay because we had an awesome time. We had a watch party. Katie and I were back home together to do some other things, but most importantly, to go complete the bet.
The bet.
But as a result of us being in the same town, we decided to host a little Brazil watch party with all of our friends back home. And really, I mean, there was only 3 fans of F1, like, to begin the race. And I think at the end of the race, everyone was a fan of F1.
Yeah, I forget how much I love watching with new fans because of all the questions we get.
Oh, questions I didn't think about. Or maybe I do think about, but I don't ever put 2 and 2 together on. Or maybe I don't. Like, to me, I've been such a fan, and we haven't been around like new fans to like watch a race with in a minute. But their questions their excitement is so fun. Like, it's just like the energy was in the room, and it was awesome to be around it and to honestly field the questions. It felt like the whole reason why we've been doing the podcast.
Yeah, it was nice. It's refreshing, and it's also just enjoyable to know that the people that necessarily, it's some of my best friends from high school who have listened to 1 or 2 episodes here and there. I know they're not going to listen to me talk about Formula One every week, but they come out, they support, they watch the race, and they're curious and interested. And that's all I can ask for is, if you're new and you want to be a fan, just sit and watch a race with us and ask us questions and let's talk about it. And let's not be the dick at the airport who, let's just have a chat. At the end of the day, we all want more. I've said it pretty much every episode. We just want more people to talk about F1 with.
Yeah, it was fun. I loved like even the simple questions of why are the tire walls different colors? I as such a fan, I just am so like that doesn't even cross my mind anymore. I just instinctively know the colors and what they mean. But it's interesting to really realize there's just so much information that you need to have to really truly consume F1 to the level of like understanding the race. And it just reminds me that we really need more beginner content out there, accessible, so that these questions there's a resource to go to. I think there are some really great resources that have come out, but I always want there to be like the next level of how to make the experience of someone who is a new fan watching, they don't feel like the information is gatekept if they don't have someone who's been a lifelong or a long time fan there to answer the questions.
Yeah, it makes me realize too, again, just how much knowledge there is. Like, we could have sat and talked to them for double the time of the race, explaining all the different things. And I think that just goes back to like, not everyone is going to be a master and know everything. There's still questions that stump me that I have to be like, oh, let me like double check that one. Or let me, some of the questions are so mind-blowingly like interesting and like pointed at a specific thing in Formula One where it's like, even, the 2 of us who have been fans for a while now and have read just about everything you can read, like, there's still things that we've got to go double check and research and say, you know what, let me get back to you on that one.
Absolutely. And with that, I think it's time that we talk about the shit show weekend. And really, it wasn't necessarily like a bad shit show. There's just so many things that happened this weekend in such a short amount of time with all of the emotions attached to them. So without further ado, let's talk about the Sao Paulo Grand Prix, sprint weekend. Ugh. This 71 lap race was the highlight of the third sprint weekend of the year. The circuit is officially named the Autodromo Jose Carlos Pace, but is most commonly referred to as Interlagos. The first official Grand Prix was held here in 1973 after a non-championship race in 72. It was inspired by three famous tracks, including Brooklands in the UK and the Roosevelt Raceway in the US. Let's go Roosevelt Raceway. The first three races that were ever raced here were won by hometown heroes, Emerson Fittipaldi in 1973 and 74, and Carlos Pace in 1975. The track is composed of 15 corners, 10 left, 5 right, with key overtaking spots at turn 1 and turn 4. The track favors overtaking, and I think we can all remember a race last year where Lewis Hamilton flew through the field not once, but twice. So yes, overtaking is heavily favored here.
This is the second running of the Sao Paulo Grand Prix. The name changed from the Brazilian Grand Prix to the Sao Paulo Grand Prix when it returned to the calendar last year after the year absence thanks to COVID. Alain Prost is one of the most successful drivers at the Brazilian GP with 6 wins, while Michael Schumacher holds the record for the most successful driver at Interlagos with 4 total wins. Another little note is McLaren's 100th victory happened at Interlagos when Ayrton Senna won his home GP in 1993. So lots of history at this track. I don't ever want to see it off the calendar. I just feel like it brings so much entertainment and so much excitement, especially for, the second to last race of the season, or the next year, I think it's the third to last race of the season.
I love it. I love this track. I love this race. I was hoping we would have a weekend of excitement. We'll say that. I didn't really think it was going to be this exciting, but I was hoping for a weekend of excitement, especially with the sprint. And I was hoping that would kind of spice things up. Really what started the weekend was the fact that it was a wet qualies. Like, that really set the weekend to be uncharacteristically different than the rest of the races this year. So without further ado, let's pop into chatting about our wet quali. And I've officially decided that wet qualies are always a time, not necessarily a good time, but they are a time. And that is important because every single wet quali session, it's chaos ensues. Like, we're just going to stay with that. And maybe that is, especially when it's a wet quali session where the rain is coming and going, or the rain's supposed to come, or the rain's if the whole session is not the same amount of wetness, it is it's a storm a brewing. I think I'm trying to use as many metaphors right now as I can. But this one was wild. I was sitting, enjoying a glass of wine, watching the race at lunch or watching qualies at lunch because I was like, okay, it's going to be the same old Max Verstappen on pole, even regardless of the wet conditions. And when I tell you, I yelped loudly in the restaurant when I saw this man take pole position. KMag took pole position ahead of Verstappen. Okay, not like necessarily the wildest thing, considering the whole session, like I said, had kind of been ridiculous. Not really ridiculous in terms of like what had happened, but kind of the mixed bag of results. Lando Norris went fastest in Q1, which my jaw again dropped, or that was the first time my jaw dropped to the floor, considering he had been so sick with food poisoning like 8 hours before. Then Verstappen went fastest in Q2 before KMag went fastest in Q3. He actually, the way the whole Q3 happened was chaos in a bottle. KMag going fastest, then Russell locking up, beaching his Merc at turn 5. If you watch that video, if you haven't done it, go back and watch that video because he locks up after his tire hit the grass, spins in the gravel, makes it to the runoff concrete where you're thinking he for a millisecond might save it. He oversaves it, spins himself, and like beaches himself finally. It was like the most obscure crash that was so anticlimactic and climactic. So that brought out a red flag, and then the rain came. I think we have to say that Gunther Steiner's quote was the best. He says it was something about a spoon. Let me find it. When it rains soup, you need to have a spoon, and we had a spoon ready today. I don't really know what that means, but
That would have
Haas
been
had a spoon.
That would have been so much better if he swapped the word spoon for boat because of the whole Gunther Steiner needs a bigger boat. Like, I would have thoroughly enjoyed that and put it on a shirt had it have been boat instead of spoon.
I was like, what? I don't know what this means. This must be something that I'm not understanding, but I'm happy for them. They had a spoon when they needed a spoon. You know who didn't have a spoon when they needed a spoon? This is the real tea and qualities. We have two fuck ups. First, we have Valtteri Bottas, who came into the pits, and it was on his call to stay on inters when everyone made the switch to slicks. We found out in qualies, like just due to the conditions, what you really needed was a second fast run to be able to get the best time and extract the best time that you could because they were struggling to get their tires up to temperature. Unfortunately, Bottas decided to stay on inters, went out, had to immediately pit, and that lost him valuable time to actually make that second run happen. So he was out. The arguably bigger fuck up was Charles Leclerc, who after this fuck up had his Mick Schumacher moment, Ferrari driver fuming through the paddock. If you know what I'm talking about, you know what I'm talking about. If not, go find the picture. Charles looked despondent, and really the best. So there's two photos you need to look up. One, Charles storming through the paddock after the session, and the first one is the photo of Charles looking in his mirrors as he is the first car in the pit lane on inters, realizing everybody behind him was on slicks. My man Ferrari, what are you doing? Another massive fuck up. Katie, emotions, thoughts, give it to us. Other than,
Like, I'm not even surprised at this point.
I mean, no, but I'm upset.
Is that bad?
No, I think that's why Matteo's job is on the line.
I'm like, oh, Charles, here we are again, buddy. It's like, hello, darkness, my old friend.
Every weekend is darkness.
Every weekend we get darker and darker and darker. And I just am praying that next weekend in Abu Dhabi, for the love of all things F1, Ferrari just has a really clean, beautiful race. There are no issues. We end on a really high note, and it swings me out of the darkness and back into the rainbow fairyland with Ferrari unicorns. So
you can hear it in his voice. Like, that is what's heartbreaking. So obviously you see it on his face, but in the radio message when he's like, did everyone complete a lap on slicks? And they're like, yes. And he's just like, beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. This is wonderful.
Yeah.
I think he like cusses later in the statement, but the fact that the first word out of his mouth is beautiful, you're like, that is just so layered. That response has so many layers of I fucking pissed complexity.
That's a Max Verstappen response. So
the radio messages this weekend,
I can't wait for the radio rewind. I don't know if it's already live. I might have missed it on F1 TV, or I think you can watch it on YouTube too. But
I mean, Katie,
I don't even know if they're done clipping it together because there was so much good content.
They need 3 volumes this weekend. Like, every session had bullshit. Okay, we're not to the race yet, but one of my favorite radio messages outside of all of the drama, right, was when Lewis is like yelling on the radio, why? My tires are good.
And they're like, box, box, box. And he's like, it's like a whiny baby who got Cheez-Its instead of goldfish. I'm not calling Lewis Hamilton a whiny baby. I'm just correcting that statement.
His immediate response is so like, my tires are good, frantic.
No, I don't want to come in, Mom. Yeah.
I mean, I just so bad.
Yeah.
There's so much emotion on the radio that you have to listen to it, and you're just like, first off, how are you going so fast and having so much emotion? I'd be like terrified. I was in turbulence last night, had zero emotions other than fear. And my inside the turbulence, my first thought was, is this what porpoising is like? Really? And I was like, because I could feel my brain moving in my skull. I was like, I'm doing this like once for 20 minutes. I don't know how they did this race after race after race, session after session after session. That would be damaged, bruised.
I hope they're all getting CT scans at the end of this season, just to
study to study the impacts of it.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on to the sprint. There's a lot to talk about in the sprint. There's a lot to talk about this weekend, but two big things that you have to kind of like mention in terms of the sprint. First off, we had George Russell winning. Wild. And all of that, I mean, the amount of people that passed Verstappen, I think was purely based on their strategy decision to put Max on the mediums for the sprint race. It's interesting. It was only Max and Latifi that were on mediums for the sprint. And so when that stat came up, I said, this is either pure genius or this is a problem. And really, I think it probably would have been a great strategy call in the long run for Red Bull if Lewis and Max hadn't have had that contact in the race. Him having the extra set of new softs would have come into play, but I mean, it's not like they could have predicted that for the sprint race at all. So yes, we had George Russell technically take his like first F1 victory, but not his first like Grand Prix victory. It was wild to see the results of the sprint race with the Mercedes up front. Did you think that was going to happen? Because that wasn't on my bingo board for the weekend.
It's like something we've been waiting for all season long. Like they haven't had a win where, Lewis Hamilton, where I'll throw the stat out again, has won a race in every single season since his start in 2008. So like all season long, we've been sitting on the edge of our chairs like, give us a Merc front row, give us a Merc front row, give it to us. And then we got it. And I'm like, I didn't know how to function. I was like, it's been so long since we've had this. I don't know what to expect. And then the fact that they stayed up there and, quote unquote, Max was nowhere to be seen after the incident. I was just like, this is everything I could have wanted and more. And I don't even know how to respond or react because it's all I've been dreaming of all season long.
No, it was such a good sprint race. We saw Mick Schumacher, we had KMag in first. We had Schumacher in 20th. Schumacher actually made up the most places in the sprint race. He made up 8. We had KMag hold off Max for the first lap because it was KMag lining up next to Verstappen. Verstappen was held off for 2 laps, which I was surprised that Verstappen didn't get him on the first turn, even with Verstappen on mediums and K-Mag on softs. I was still like, Verstappen's got him going into turn 1. It was nice to see the Haas leading the charge. But really, outside of the fact that, Merc was in the front, K-Mag started first, Schumacher made up those positions, the real tea of qualies was Alpine. And we're going to do a total deep dive here after we get through the race because we have to talk about how the Alpine relationship crumbled this weekend, or finally, like, the crack happened. Like in Mamma Mia, when finally the earth cracks, that is what happened. That's what I'm calling what happened this weekend. And then after the race, sprint race, we had Ocon's car on fire, and Ocon didn't even know at first it was his car. He thought it was the Williams next to him. It felt like at every moment something was chaotically happening. But the sprint, I would say, this weekend showed that sprints are really fun to watch when qualies is a dumpster. Like when the quali results are a mixed bag, the sprint race is really interesting. I also think it proves that sprints can be interesting if there's more teams fighting and with a potential to snag points. Like the front was awesome to watch, trying to see how far Lewis was going to make it up. He went from P8 to P3. That was really interesting, but also the scramble for the last set of points because KMag went from P1 to P8. So there was like a lot of overtaking. I don't know if maybe the better way of saying this is that it proved that sprints can be awesome at a track where overtaking is possible, and paired with a quali session that the results are a little bit different than normal.
Yeah, it was wild. It was interesting, and it set us up for an even more interesting race on Sunday. So, as Megan said, the pole position for the sprint race was Kevin Magnussen. He finished P8. He assisted Haas with an extra point. They totaled 2 points this weekend, so they're ahead of AlphaTauri in the fight for P8. And it was a sad go for KMag in the first lap, which I'll get into in a minute. But let's talk about our winner, because not only did our George Russell, yes, I'm calling him our George Russell, win the sprint race to start the Grand Prix in first, he had an amazing drive, which included 2 faultless safety car restarts from the lead to go on to win his maiden victory. So George Russell, our George Russell, won the Grand Prix. He became the 113th different driver to win a Grand Prix, the 20th from Great Britain. And I have a couple fun facts talking about George. Interlagos is actually where George made his first race weekend appearance when he drove for Force India in FP1 back in 2017. So I just love when you see that pairing of this is where they had their first debut, this is where they had their first win. It really shows how far they've come and how far they've grown. And to see that happen on the same track is, I just think it's one of the beautiful things that can happen in this sport. This win for George ends his run of 4 events without a podium and moves him 25 points clear of Lewis Hamilton in the Drivers' Championship. He also took the fastest lap, giving him an extra championship point. And another little fun fact, God Save the King, which is the new British anthem after the sad passing of Queen Elizabeth, has never been played for a winning driver of a constructor or for a driver or constructor at a world championship event before.
Because she's been queen for that damn, or she was queen for that damn long.
Exactly. So I saw that pop up and I was like, oh, Megan will love that. If I'm sure you already knew that in the back of your head somewhere, but I was like, we got to throw that in there and at least mention it.
It was wild because this weekend was the drop of the crown. So when I wasn't watching F1 stuff or hanging out with family or in friends, I was binging the crown. And so I don't know, it has nothing, they're 2 separate worlds, but it makes me happy that a British driver won this weekend. Did you know that I did not realize this, and no one knew until Toto admitted it. He had a water leak. They didn't think he was going to finish the race. And now I'm so glad we didn't know that, because if this victory had been taken from him like Shakir was taken from him, I don't think if we could have recorded this episode. I would have been in tears. I would have been watching a George Russell highlight reel crying for that man, because 2 race wins snatched. Nope. I think he's broken a curse. He got out of his curse. Some other
got out
people
of the
still have curses.
To round out our podium, we had teammate Lewis Hamilton in P2. This is his third consecutive race finishing second. I wanted to make sure I said that correctly. And his fifth time in P2 this season. Again, he's still without a win for 2022. There was a moment that we'll talk about later where we thought, we might see some role reversal, but we didn't. And so we've got one more race this season to see what Lewis can do. And if this weekend was any showing of how far Mercedes has come, then get ready for next weekend. Lewis was also voted driver of the day. So he had a brilliant race, nicely done. And he has found consistency in a year that has not been very consistent for Mercedes.
It really does show that all of his struggles and all of his experimentation in the first 8 races, while it probably didn't feel like it was worth it then, the development struggle for Mercedes has been rough but profitable. And if this is any indication, if this, massive development is any indication, I'm very interested to see what happens next year. Because if Ferrari really do have a new team principal and Red Bull is still strong and Mercedes is back-ish, what will next year give us the more mixed bag situation that we are hoping for this year? I can only hope.
I can only pray and hope and light all the candles and burn all the sage. Our boy Carlos Sainz took P3. He secured P2 in the sprint, but started P7 due to a 5-place grid penalty for taking a new engine. This is his ninth podium finish of 2022. And I was doing the math and I was double checking and I saw that. And then I went into the, standings and I was like, he really has been on the podium that many times. Like, our man. It doesn't feel like it should be 9, but it is.
Because we've spent the whole year talking about how shitty his luck has been with DNFs and how he's made some mistakes. So it is wild. He's had 9 podium finishes. And really those 5 DNFs.
5.
The 4 I remember because they're back to back. There were 2 times this year where in 2 races back to back, he only completed 1 lap. Moving on. I don't want to talk about that. It gives me anxiety. But it's just wild that he has 9 podiums. Like, the stats for him are just wildly different. You have positive and you have very negative.
Negative, yes. And this is actually the first time he's been able to properly celebrate on the podium at Interlagos. If you remember, back in 2019, he was promoted to P3 after the podium ceremony had already happened. So it was kind of like this moment of like, congrats, Carlos. Not only are you kind of celebrating this race, but I think internally you were also probably celebrating that success back then. To round out our top 10, I'll go through these nice and quick. 4th place was Charles Leclerc. He went from the barriers to P4. More on that in a little. He is now tied with Sergio Perez for 2nd in the Drivers' Championship, which we will get into in a little bit. That's where all the drama really stems from. Fernando Alonso took 5th, and he redeemed himself after the horrible Saturday sprint by surging through the field from P17 to finish ahead of his teammate in P5. This ties his best result for the season for the 3rd time. Max Verstappen, who, again, we will get into in a moment, took 6th. Not his worst performance of the year. He took 7th at Silverstone in Singapore, but his lowest finish at Interlagos since joining Red Bull in 2016. Sergio Perez was in 7th. Shitty end to the race thanks to teammate Max. again, we're saving all of these moments, but I'm just prefacing, get ready for all the drama. Again, he is now tied with Charles Leclerc for second in the Drivers' Championship going into the last race of the season. Esteban Ocon took 8th for the second race in the row and the second year in a row at Interlagos. Valtteri Bottas got up there into the points, scoring consecutive points in consecutive races after 0 points in the 10 races prior. So I'm happy that he's ending on a higher note than what we saw in the whole mid chunk of the season. And then our Lance Stroll finished in 10th. This is his 6th finish in P10 for the year.
He had like a wildly, like, no one talked about him during the race.
No.
Which is probably good considering Stroll and Vettel had an incident in the sprint races that gave Stroll a 10-second penalty and 3 penalty points for pushing Vettel wide into the grass. So that's a friendship, teammateship that isn't ending on good terms either.
No, there's so many to discuss.
Seb is probably like, get me the hell out of here. I'm done. You
Seb
guys
is
have
like,
lost it.
Seb's like, I have one more in me, and that's all I've got left. And I hope it's the best weekend ever for him. So a couple other key things to note that happened in the race. We had some, and by some, I mean quite a few early race contacts. Our friends who were new to Formula One were like, is this normal for all of this to be happening? And we were like, some races, yes, some races, not so much, but it made for a pretty entertaining go. Ricardo tapped KMag, which caused KMag to spin, and then he hit Danny, which ultimately caused them both to retire. Daniel is handed a 3-place grid penalty for his final McLaren outing next weekend in Abu Dhabi. A few turns after the safety car restart, we have Max Verstappen down the inside of Lewis Hamilton, and the two-touch thanks to Max. Lewis could have left him some more room, but it's fine.
No, the stewards, no. That might be what people think, but at the end of the day, the stewards said that Max should have backed out. And really, let's all be honest, what Lewis did was what Max has been doing for years, where he goes for it and doesn't stop. Max literally admitted in his post-race interview, he was like, I went for it. I did it.
Yeah.
Like, he was like, no shame in his game.
So that caused Lewis to run wide, and he fell down the grid. This was the first contact Max has had all year, but let's be real, he's been up in the front, so I don't really hold that very high. So he got 5 seconds for causing a collision. Leclerc and Norris in the same lap. Lando Norris bumped into Charles Leclerc, sending him into the wall. Luckily, Leclerc was able to get up and running again and rejoined in the back of the grid in 18th. We saw an impressive drive from him. He came up and finished 4th. And Lando also received 5 seconds for causing a collision. Sainz had his right rear brake smoking thanks to a visor tear-off that got caught in the brake ducts, which had to be removed before it caused a failure. So it caused Sainz to pit early, meaning he committed to a 3-stop, which was not in the strategy books for them at the beginning of the race. Then we had this mystery man in the pit lane. So Mick Schumacher was pulling in for a pit stop when this Alfa Romeo team member was standing near the Haas garage, totally not where he was supposed to be. He got very close to the car and was gesturing. It was very unclear, but there were some gestures to Mick. So the FIA took note of this, and in the post-race investigation, they actually fined Alfa Romeo €1,000 after determining that the situation was unsafe. But it was very odd to see live, and in the post-race, we had some analysis of it. It just was like...
Do we ever get clarification on who that man was?
I could not find the name of who it was, but it was an Alfa Romeo team member that was not a part of the pit crew.
Okay.
So there's that.
There's a break in the simulation.
No, it was literally like a chink in the armor. something was not right. So yeah, I had to throw that in there because it was part of the talk of the weekend. With 19 laps to go, Lando Norris lost power, triggering a full safety car. He retired and DNF'd. And as the safety car was ending, there was some talk between Ocon and his engineer about not fighting Alonso, who at the moment was behind Ocon but had the tire advantage. So again, we'll talk about their relationship in a little bit, but Ocon desperately wanted to fight and get Vettel, and the race engineer was like, that's fine, but don't you dare fight Alonso. And then in the end, Perez tumbled down the order from P3 to P7, and there was the drama, which we will again save for a little bit because there's just a lot to get into with that. One other huge note that happened during the race that we've got to talk about is the safety car issues with Yuki Tsunoda being skipped in the unlapping. So 3 drivers were down a lap when the race was suspended in the final safety car and should have been allowed to pass the rest of the queue and the safety car to unlap themselves. So Williams teammates Albon and Latifi were allowed to do so, but Yuki Tsunoda was denied the chance. And it was this like weird freak incident, and I'll explain kind of why it was a freak incident, but it was essentially an anomaly that happened. So we all know that this process of allowing lapped cars to rejoin the lead lap was put under fierce scrutiny after last year's Abu Dhabi restart. So that, which led to the FIA introducing an automated system. But due to this specific circuit and where the pit lane is in comparison to the circuit, we had this complication of Tsunoda being overlooked. So this is what was said. At this time, he entered the pit lane. He was able to go faster than the train of cars behind the safety car. In doing so, he unlapped himself when crossing the control line in the pit lane. When he rejoined the circuit, the systems correctly indicated that he was, again, a lap down. However, as he had already unlapped himself once, he was not eligible to do so again when the safety car period was ending. So all in all, very unusual scenario. There were no systems or procedural errors, but it's one of those unpredictable scenarios that can happen, and there are no immediate changes that need to be implemented. However, they did say that it will be discussed at future sporting advisory committees as part of normal review procedures. So again, it's a new system. We had a weird anomaly moment of unlapping in the pit lane, but it's definitely something to note, and we hope not to see it in the future.
I mean, it really, okay, look, people are freaking out about this. It really, like, wasn't that big of a deal because it was one car, and it was really just a function of the fact that he, like, the system got tricked into thinking he unlapped himself. They still followed the race procedures. It's not like there was any human errors here. It was just a glitch in the simulation.
Lots of glitches in the simulation this weekend.
Like, people were losing their minds. Like, yeah, how did they overlook this? I'm like, because the computer said that it had happened. Like, this isn't like that hard to wrap your head around. Yes, should the computer program probably be fixed? Correct. But it wasn't like, oh my gosh, this is a travesty. The whole race has been called into jeopardy. It was a glitch in the way the system works, period. Moving on. They're not going to talk about this. Like, it might be a glimmer. They're going to be like, look, if you pit, you're not unlapped. Or they're going to say, like, they're going to say something about like just holding in the pit and then letting them rejoin the back of the pack, which would probably be the safer. Because if you pit, then you're even further behind. Then you have that could just cause even more issues.
Yeah. So just something to note, but not something to freak out about.
Overall, this weekend was wild. Lots of things were happening off the track as well. We had Lewis Hamilton get his official honorary citizenship Was it amazing when the Brazilian parliament did call him an 8-time world champion? Yes, they did. And they also mentioned Roscoe. How could you not mention Roscoe, as he is Lewis's child? Like I said before, Lando Norris was out sick with a stomach bug, so it was actually questionable if he was going to race at all this weekend, which if he hadn't raced, yes, guess who was the only reserve driver available? Nick DeVries. While I am very happy that Lando Norris was safe, I don't know if he's so happy he participated in that race considering he DNF'd. I will say it would have been hilarious to see Nick DeVries race for McLaren. It would have been even funnier to see the whole breakdown of points, because he then would, if he had scored points, he would have scored points for 2 teams this year. I mean, he is literally just collecting experiences in F1 cars. He's just like, I'll do a little racing here, I'll do a little racing there.
And I love that. Why not? Get him in there. Get him more practice so he can come out next year and be an absolute all-star.
He's older than me, or he's right around the same age as me. So I am very thankful that he's gotten to collect these experiences before he officially joins the team or joins the grid next year. This week we should find out what the hell Haas is doing, but we already know it's going to be Nico Hülkenberg. They're going to announce it this week, which I don't even believe, considering they said they were going to announce it last week. There's also some rumors that Daniel Ricciardo is going to finally be announced as a reserve driver this week. Look, I'm done with these. They're going to do not even tell me what day you think you're going to announce it. Just fucking announce it.
In other news, Gasly's somewhat embarrassing penalty points. So we just got to mention it. He currently has 10. If he hits 12, he'll be banned from 1 race. This weekend, he was caught speeding in the pit lane. Every other driver who has done that this season has received a penalty point, but Gasly did not. So he's said that he doesn't want to miss out on a race next year. He is concerned about penalty points. He doesn't think that his driving has been necessarily dangerous, and he's been in talks with the FIA about, the rules around it all and trying to figure out if they're too harsh, if they're, all the things. So we shall see what happens with our young Pierre Gasly and his penalty points.
If you want a full breakdown about our conversation on penalty points, go listen to the Mexico Grand Prix recap. We talked about it a lot, considering that was the race that Gasly was awarded points that got him up to 10. So we discussed whether or not the penalty point system should be reimagined, revised. I think innately the spirit of the system isn't wrong. Maybe how it's applied is wrong. But it is interesting that Gasly didn't get that 1 penalty point. I thought it was coming. And then I was like, might as well do something else and take the race ban at Abu Dhabi.
Yeah, might as well. And then start fresh next year. And finally, for other news coming out of this week, F2 and F3 announced their calendars for 2023. F2 will feature 14 rounds, while F3 will feature a record-breaking 10 rounds, including a debut in Monaco, which shall be very interesting. Both F2 and F3 will be also making a debut appearance in Australia. So we say it all the time, but I think next year is really the year to actively start watching F2 and F3, especially with some new races on the schedule, and starting to think about who is up and coming in the world of F1 as well.
I'm more interested to see what happens with the Formula W, which I'm calling it until they give it a name, and W Series next year. I'm very interested to see where we are with that. I would also really like whatever female racing series to have like a very clear way of watching it for fans, because it was quite tricky this year to be able to watch the W Series and to find the race, whereas F2 and F3 are on F1 TV and I can watch them.
This podcast is brought to you by Racing Thread, Formula One clothing for any occasion.
Their clothing features subtle, evocative, embroidered designs for your favorite F1 moments.
From Ricardo's Monza shoey to Sebastian's Australian scooter ride.
From Lewis's Brazilian comeback to Carlando's round of golf.
Whether you're out to dinner with friends, watching the race at home, or cheering in the grandstands,
Gone are the embarrassing sponsor logos. Instead, Racing Thread is F1 clothing you are comfortable wearing anywhere.
right now, Dirty Driving listeners can get 15% off Racing Thread's entire range of t-shirts, sweatshirts, and polos using the code Dirty Driving.
That's Dirty Driving, all capitals, no spaces, for 15% off their entire clothing range.
Head over to racingthread.com to shop F1 racewear for anywhere.
Okay, Katie, I have been waiting to discuss this. This is my epic question for you for this weekend because I don't know my own answer, so I'm going to force you to answer and just take the heat on whatever you decide. Which was more fun to celebrate, the Haas first pole ever or the Mercedes front row to George Russell pipeline situation?
That's a tough one. I think I have my answer, and I think my answer is going to be, well, let me preface this with, while the George Russell victory, we had the tears, we had the emotions, we had the little jumping dance on the podium when he got handed the trophy, we had the Toto FaceTime call, we had Lewis hugging him and congratulating him on Instagram and all the things. I'm truly so happy for George, but I think we knew it was coming. We didn't know when it was coming, but we knew it was coming. We knew it was going to happen. Everyone says that George is the future of Mercedes. So, I knew he was going to have that race win secured eventually. Did I ever think that I would see a Haas on pole? No, I did not. So I'd have to say that KMag's pole was if anything, maybe 5% more exciting, just because that's one of those freak things that happens every blue moon or, once in a blue moon that we don't expect. And it completely shifts the energy of the weekend, and it completely shifts the energy in the Haas garage. And
I mean, it was awesome.
It was awesome.
Literally,
It was
KMag
phenomenal.
standing on his car, celebrating, was wild. The radio message where Kevin's like, "What position are we?" and the engineer is like, "You're P1, mate." On
Crazy.
Gene Haas's birthday weekend.
Yeah.
I think it was really a nice. So, like you said, George Russell, I'm not discounting anything, but the Haas podium was a nice reminder that even in a season where things seem to be pretty locked up by one team, there is a reason to keep pushing and find your boat or your spoon, and to take advantage of when you've brought the spoon and everyone's gotten a fork. I don't know what that metaphor was, or that statement was, Diener. It was awesome. It was awesome to see. It was awesome to talk about it. It really brought immediately texts were flying holy shit, KMag. And it's a nice reminder. I would also like to point out that, look, did I actually think that George Russell was going to win the race Thursday morning? No. But Interlagos is a front row heavy front row to win pipeline. 24 of the 31 races have been won from the front row, 14 of which have been won from the driver who starts in first. So there are instances where we can have a Lewis Hamilton moment, but really when I saw that Russell was lining up first and he was able to get around Verstappen in the sprint in the race on Sunday, I was like, once there was the contact with Verstappen, the race was George's minus the water leak, you know, if that had fallen apart. But really, like, the KMag thing came out of nowhere. Like, Q3 starts and 2 minutes in, I'm like, holy shit, this is happening. So that was the difference.
And I think just in general, the KMag poll shows that anything is possible in Formula One. And every weekend there could be something life-changing and exciting for one of these drivers that we would have never expected. It's one of those Pierre Gasly Monza podium moments where it's just like, damn, that really did just happen.
That's your inspiration for the day. That's your inspiration. Well, from great highs of the weekend to the friendships, and are they even friends? Partnerships falling apart. So let's start with the team order side of this and the teams where I don't think the partnerships are falling apart. First off, we had Ferrari. So Charles asked to invert the cars at the end of the race, swap positions, because Leclerc wanted the points in his battle with Sergio Perez for P2 in the championship. Leclerc said on the radio, first unhinged radio message we're going to talk about, think about the championship in case positions are like this. I mean, buddy, you are going for the undercut. You're going for the hitting the Ferrari and the emotions, because right now Ferrari's bleeding points. And Leclerc's like, think about it. Think about it.
This
Ferrari
man
says it's too risky.
This man was begging over the radio. I have never
What's that song
heard.
like? I'm begging.
He was just at that concert too, so I bet he was humming that in his head. No, he was literally just at the. It's I'm gonna butcher the name of it, but like Manskin, something like that is the band name who sang that song. So I'm sure he was humming that while he was begging.
It just, Ferrari saying it's too risky is probably the most intelligent strategy call that they made, because I just really didn't fully believe that they were going to be able to pull that off. In fact, in that whole, if they had decided to invert the cars, I wouldn't have been surprised if they had fucked it up. Not that I'm saying that Carlos Sainz and Charles Leclerc were to be at fault, but I mean, just saying it's too risky and finish the race cleanly is probably the best decision they made, as Charles had already gone from the barriers to P4. It was like P17 at one point. Everyone's forgotten that he made a dash through the pack, but just like Alonso did. You know what? Take the points, move on into Abu Dhabi and see what happens. It also seemed really foolish, just after how like chaotic things had been. It was a smart play, I think.
Yeah, and Charles said after the race that, you know, he doesn't normally ask for these things, but there were discussions prior to the race, so that's why he did come on the radio to talk about it. And he said, for some reason, we changed our mind. I don't know yet the reason. And then I scoured the internet for this quote, because everywhere was only the first half of the quote. And I remember seeing the second half of the quote, but I couldn't quite remember where I saw it. So I looked for this quote for about 15 minutes last night, just because I think this really explains their partnership and why it's not crumbling. So Sainz said post-race, I heard nothing on the radio. Honestly, no information came to me on the radio. So that was the part that was all over the internet. This is the part where I scoured for. He said in the post-race, you guys know I'm a big team player, and whatever would have come, I would have done, but it never came to me. So I just think that speaks to their partnership. It speaks to their teammateship, their friendship, their collaboration, all the things that had that come down to Carlos, he would have been a team player and given Charles that position. I think, Megan, you're exactly right, and Ferrari made the safe call in not switching.
Alonso was they were worried about Alonso. They were worried about the fact they were already being investigated, and there was no ability for the team to play around with timing. Like the goal at that point was cut a gap to the Red Bulls behind you. Like cut a gap. Because if we get hit with a time penalty, then that could risk positions. They went for maximizing without being dumb, and hey, I'll give it to him. I'll give it to him on that. I would also say that in this time, it was better to maximize for the constructors, not necessarily for the drivers. And then knowing that Red Bull was they themselves were arguing. I don't know which happened first. I don't know if they were concurrently, but they were watching Red Bull, seeing that Max had passed Checo, and they correctly predicted that Max wasn't going to hand the position back. Before we get there, we have to talk about Mercedes and team orders. So again, very interesting here. We had multiple conversations by the commentators about the fact that, so while Ferrari were holding positions, Mercedes throughout the race, they were allowed to race each other. Like they were allowed to race each other. And I 100% fully believe that would have been a Lewis Hamilton victory if he hadn't had the contact with Verstappen. But after the contact with Verstappen, I fully believe that there was not even a thought crossing their mind about inverting the cars. Because at that point, Mercedes was like, we do this for the team. We maximize the results here. And really, who was going to take that away from George Russell? I don't see them doing it. If Lewis was fighting for the championship, no questions asked, they would have done it. But the championship has been locked up. So this race was about maximizing points and really maximizing potential to see what the cars have going into the next year of development. A win is a win. A podium is a podium in terms of Mercedes. And they weren't about to screw it up, especially now that we know about the water leak in George's car. I think they were probably all holding their breath that he was going to get to the end of the race. It was cute that Toto was like, we just agreed on the radio. We were going to let him race it out and hope for the best. They didn't stop him early, which is great.
And I think that's because there is, again, some trust between the two drivers compared to what we're going to talk about next, which is Red Bull. Oh, everyone take a nice deep breath. We're going to get through
this
it.
whole thing is really dumb. I've decided that this is really dumb. That is my general reaction to this whole thing. And that's what I'm going to preface this entire conversation by. This is fucking dumb. Max has won the drivers. The team has won the constructors. And this is the bullshit you're pulling in the second to last race.
Yeah. So to preface this, if you missed it or, whatever, Checo was P3 with 9 laps to go. He fell back to P6, and then Max was given the go-ahead in lap 67 to pass Perez to take points off of Alonso and Leclerc. The very next lap, Checo was told that if you're still together on the last lap, you will swap back and Checo will retake the place. On lap 71, which is the final lap, there was a radio message to Max that said, if we don't pass Fernando on the exit of 12, can we let Checo back through, please? Radio silence. Nothing. And then we get a Max, let Checo through, please. Nothing. And then we get a Max, what happened? And Max responded, I told you last time, don't ask me that again, okay? Are we clear about that? I gave my reasons and I stand by it. Then Checo gets told and responds with, he gets told and he is told that we're going to talk about it in the post-race debrief. And Checo just responds with, thank you for that, guys. Moment of silence. It shows who he really is. So
I mean, really, we could just end the conversation there. Checo said what all of us were thinking. It shows who he really is. Max, the championship's done, dusted. So Max, bring out the reasons. Bring out the reasons. Let us decide if these reasons are valid, because what reasons could you possibly have? And if anybody on the internet is saying Monaco, then Red Bull has some teenage drama to deal with, because even if I'm so heated about this, even if Checo intentionally crashed in Monaco, which I am not going to get into that analysis. We'd have to look at throttle maps. I watched it so many times. Even if Monaco is the reason, even if Monaco was like round 8, we are on round 21. You guys couldn't have hashed this out before now? So you're telling me that you've won both championships and you're still being petty over Monaco, which if he crashed, you have something to be angry about, but that anger should have happened back then. Why are we if that's the reason, Max, bring out Daniel Ricciardo. He'll be a driver for Red Bull in 2024. Like, that's what I'm going to say. If you are still upset about Monaco, Max, then you and Checo will not survive next year, and Daniel will have Checo's seat.
I just want to throw a couple more things into this conversation before we put it to bed, but Checo assisted Max a total of 8 times in 2021 to secure the title. And Checo said, I think if Max has 2 championships, it's thanks to me. He also said, after all I've done for him, it's a bit disappointing, to be honest. I'm really surprised. And in the final finality of the situation, Christian said that, the drivers have shook hands. We've talked about it. Everything's fine, whatever. And Max did say that if we go to Abu Dhabi and he needs the points because they're tied, Charles and Checo, it's not the end of the world. It's all about who finishes ahead anyway. If he needs the help, I'll be there.
Why? No. Why does anyone believe that? Because if he wanted to help him, he would have helped him, because Checo let him through so he could go get Alonso. He had no pace, and then he didn't give the position back. He literally already said, don't ask me to give up positions. If I was Checo, I would be livid. And this is really, I think, the big issue here is Max does bullshit like this, and it makes him unlikable, especially against his teammate after both championships are decided. And it's not just his teammate, it is a teammate that has a massive following. I genuinely, I cannot fathom what the reasons are, Katie. Do you have, other than Monaco, what reasons would you have?
I don't have one. I don't. And so that's why, do I believe these few news sources that are claiming that Perez admitted to Horner and Marco that he deliberately crashed in qualifying? I don't know. And you know what? Like, Max is the selfish little bitch every single weekend. If Checo wanted to be the selfish little bitch one weekend out of 20.
I mean, it's fucked up, but.
Yeah. Am I saying you should deliberately crash anytime? No. But does Max deliberately do things all the time? Yes. And here's the thing. I don't know if they had this conversation after Monaco of if team orders come through, Max is, has stated his reasons why, and now he's holding it up now. I don't know. I'm not privy to those conversations. I couldn't tell you why Max gave no fucks about his teammate this weekend, but it definitely shows his character more so than I've ever seen it before. Has Max been a little bitch his whole life? Yes. Do I blame his father for that? Yes. Can we change that? Probably not. Have I ever seen it like this before? No.
I genuinely fully believed all of their press experience together. And if there has been some deep-seated upsetness about Monaco, it really has not come out. It really at all has not come out. I don't think I've seen a single article post Monaco where, I mean, I'm not going to conclude. I cannot conclude whether or not I think Checo did it on purpose, even looking at all the data. My bigger sticking point here is, how did none of us know about this? Or how wasn't this a bigger conversation? And it just hasn't been. So it seems a little weird. I don't know. It really shows who Max is. And I think at the end of the day, it has really upset a lot of people, especially because these mystical reasons are veiled in secrecy. Like, you're going to come out and say that you just like, it's so interesting. He's so open about some things. And then he's so like, I've given my reasons. What does that mean? Nothing. It makes you even more unlikable. There, I said it. Finally, our last partnership we need to discuss, and another partnership that I will say has officially crumbled. Max and Checo are in the midst of crumbling. Ocon and Alonso, it is done so. So the two Alpine drivers made contact in the sprint race. Alonso started the pass, but Ocon was slower due to some previous aero damage that he had picked up. Alonso ultimately was faster because Ocon had that aero damage, and Alonso admitted that he slightly misjudged the time and pull out, and he struck Ocon from behind. Alonso's front wing hit Ocon's rear tire. So basically it was a combination of those two things. Alonso trying to pass, Ocon slower, Alonso faster, and it all just came to a head. Ultimately, it resulted in being 100% Fernando Alonso's fault. He was given a 5-second time penalty, which would be added to the end of his sprint race time. 2 penalty points, so he's up to 6, and he would end the sprint race in P15. But really, I think at the end of the day, it's the comments that Alonso said around the incident during the race and after the race that are where the partnership is crumbling. Like, Alonso was penalized both in points and times in his end sprint result, but it's the comments that show that there are massive disasters happening at Alpine. Not that we didn't already know that based on this year. But Alonso, right after he had lost the front ring, he said, I lost the front wing thanks to our friend. You guys aren't friends. That's sarcasm. The fact that Fernando Alonso is great at sarcasm going that fast just shows his skills. But, awkward. It gets even worse when after the sprint, not a race, after the sprint, Alonso was asked if he had spoken to Ocon, and he said, no, not really. I don't need to. I think it's one more race and then it's over. Finally. That is almost as much of like an FU as it shows who he really is. I mean, These messages, like, these drivers are just laying it all out on the line this weekend.
I mean, now's the time to show the tensions, because Alonso's right. There is one more race, and then everyone goes on vacation and takes a break from each other and comes back so excited for next year. But I don't think
Alonso's going to be happy to see Ocon next year.
I mean, I don't think Checo was happy to see Esteban back in the Racing Point days. I don't think Alonso was happy to see Hamilton back in the McLaren partnership year.
Do we think Alonso's ever happy to see Hamilton?
Like, I read this interesting article talking about like what could be the things going on in Alpine, and it's just like they're both teammates who have had rocky relationships with past teammates, and so like I don't know. Could it have been like a more specific thing? Yes. Do I just think that they're both a little hot-headed and pissy, for lack of a better word? Maybe.
I mean, Fernando has a reason to be mad at like the Alpine establishment. That's why he dipped. They were offering him less money, and so he was like, "Peace, I'm going to go where all the money is at Aston Martin." It shows that I don't think Alpine and Fernando have come to terms on how he decided to leave the team. I definitely think that this is another instance where Alpine is clearly not doing right by its drivers, considering Piastri was like, "Peace, I'm dipping." Alonso was like, "Peace, I'm dipping." It is interesting that Ocon is staying, so I'm wondering if there is some favoritism. Again, that's just kind of like supposition based on like reserve and other driver are leaving because they're very unhappy, where Ocon seems to be not as unhappy. There's clearly some tensions, and it probably has to do with the fact that Alonso has been the one that has disproportionately had an unreliable car this year compared to Ocon. And then for this incident to happen and Alonso to take the blame, it's just so many things. Tensions are hot. Maybe this proves that we shouldn't have more than 21 races in a calendar year, because at race 21, the drivers start to crumble.
Yeah, I don't
We've hit
even
the witching hour.
I don't even want to think about Pierre and Esteban on a team as teammates next year, because there's another rocky history there. So
all over an ex-girlfriend, apparently rumored to be that's the cause of their issues.
So it's just like, who's not pissed off at who on the grid? Like,
we really need to chart it out. Let's chart it out. I think the only people that are more pissed off at themselves than each other are the McLarens.
Yeah, which let's
we had
talk
Danny
about.
Rick,
Let's talk about
who crashed into KMag on lap 1. Which, by the way, do you know that both of KMag's lap 1 incidents that have resulted in a DNF have been at the hands of Daniel Ricciardo? This makes him sound like a menace. It was this year and it was 2017. Ultimately, it was Ricciardo's fault. We could have. We knew that was coming. Really, the whole incident wouldn't have been as bad because Ricciardo tagged the back of Magnussen, and what made it even worse was the fact that Magnussen spun and into the path of Ricciardo, and then Ricciardo like ran into him again. So unfortunate. It wasn't a racing incident though, because it was just 2 cars were involved in it. A racing incident has to be a multiple car involved situation. Multiple cars don't have to be taken out, but multiple cars have to be involved in the incident and causing the incident. This one was just 2 drivers, wholly Daniel Ricciardo's fault, and given a 3-place grid penalty for his final F1 race of the season and potentially his career, as he does not have a seat on the grid. But Red Bull might be looking for a backup for Checo. Then we had, unfortunate race for Daniel Ricciardo as he puts an unfortunate year to bed. Then we had Lando Norris, who started the weekend with food poisoning. And I swear maybe that's why he had a rough go of it on Sunday. I don't know. I don't know if he wasn't feeling well. When him and Leclerc made contact, another uncaged radio message where Charles Leclerc called him a dick. Well, he is a beep. I am guessing it's dick, based on the context of what he said. Lando would ultimately go on to that race DNF. Leclerc would make it back through the field, which no one's talking about. Again, I'm going to say it again. It was completely forgotten in all the other drama. Lando was given a 5-second penalty for that incident. So, unfortunate day for the McLaren drivers. It would only get a little bit worse after the race when Norris was like, "I'm not here to let everyone past." Again, another uncaged comment by a driver after tensions clearly ran high this weekend. So not a great weekend for either of them. And really just a shitty end to a shitty season for McLaren.
Yeah, like they had great chances of jumping into fourth place in the Constructors' Championship, since the Alpines were also fighting in the back of the pack. You know, this could have been a very successful weekend, but the two McLaren drivers chose to play some bumper cars instead of Formula One, and that's that. And this was actually McLaren's first double DNF since the 2017 Monaco Grand Prix. So it's been a while since both drivers have been out for McLaren, but that record's over, and here we are with a double DNF this past weekend.
0 points in their battle with Alpine, and essentially it's just not possible. They're 29 points away from each other at this point, with Alpine leading. So I think that race is buttoned up, and not in the way the Papaya Nation wanted.
No. So, while Megan and I were in St. Louis this weekend, we completed the bet. The tattoos are done. You can see them on our Instagram. We both got cute little half matching F1 cars on our wrists. And Megan had another solid weekend. She will end the season in fourth, and our brother Gavin solidified the win for the year. We loved the fantasy league this year and can't wait for next year. I think we're going to do a pot of money, and Megan and I will come up with another bet. We threw out I don't know if you've heard of it, but the Denny's challenge, where if you lose your fantasy, you got to go sit in a Denny's for 24 hours, and every pancake you eat shaves an hour off your time. So
I don't think this is necessarily a punishment for Katie, though. She loves
I love pancakes. So I'll sit in a Denny's. Also, I know John, my intern, will come and sit with me. Also, I'll at least have some company. So
no, the whole point is you have to do it alone. That makes it enjoyable. That's not how it works. The whole point is you are alone at a Denny's eating 24 pancakes by yourself.
We will discuss the rules of the bet. I think
this
we
is
should
a casual Saturday for her now. She's like, yeah, I lost the bet, but I could hang out in a Denny's and eat pancakes.
Yeah, we're gonna have to come up with something to make it a little extra spicy.
You have to do it alone.
Yeah. All right.
My winner this week I'm doing two. One on track, Carlos Sainz. You didn't talk him a lot this episode, and I think that's a positive, other than, the discussion about Ferrari's team orders. I think the fact that we didn't talk about Sainz having a dumpster fire of a weekend means that it was a positive weekend for him. It was one of the smoothest performances for the driver this year, and he completely deserves this after the DNF disasters of the year. He took P2 in the sprint. He started P7 due to that engine penalty, and then ultimately made his way back onto the podium for his 9th of the year. Solid performance, not a lot of criticisms. He handled that 3-stop strategy when that wasn't in the playbook. It was the slowest way to make the race happen, and he made the slowest way possible and was able to even get a 3rd place out of it. My off-track winner was the fans. I gotta say it, this weekend was a great one for the fans in Brazil at the race, but also all of us that were watching. It wasn't necessarily like a one-off winner, because we know that George Russell will go on to win more, but it did feel nice and exciting to have a non-Red Bull win of a weekend. And I think it energized people. Clearly the people were talking about things online, positive and negative.
And my winner this weekend is Mercedes. They locked out the front row and converted it to their first 1-2 in more than 2 years. Imola 2020 was the last time that they took a 1-2 with Valtteri and Lewis. It's the first time two British drivers have taken a 1-2 since the 2012 Canada GP with Hamilton and Jenson Button. So I thought that was another great win for the Brits out there. And then it was Mercedes' first victory of 2020, their first win in almost a year. And they have had 15 podium finishes prior to this win this year. So it was just, again, the cherry on top to a long season of wishing and hoping and wanting a win from them. It gave them their 125th triumph in F1, and they also cut the gap to Ferrari to 19 points for second in the Constructors' Championship. Do I think that may be possible? Who knows? Next weekend could be another big blow up of craziness, so we will just have to wait and see, but they're my winners because they deserve it. They've worked really hard this year, and they finally given us something to say, all right, let's get to next year. Let's see what we can do.
My loser is Checo. It's kind of like a duh moment. It just, so much went wrong this weekend, but mainly in the race. He was on those old tires after that last safety car restart and just didn't have the grip or the pace to be able to fight. I mean, he was sitting P3 with 9 laps to go, ended up P7. Just absolutely dismal. And on top of that, his teammate was a jerk to him. And it makes me a little bit concerned about his future at Red Bull and his future relationships at the team. So it is kind of the first time that I've questioned whether or not he should stay at Red Bull.
And my loser is his teammate, Max Verstappen, because, well, we got to see his character. We got to see his true colors. We got to see everything that comes with being a supportive teammate. And he really shot the bucket. And I think this will come back to not necessarily, I don't think haunt him is the right way to say it, but I think this will definitely come back and get him one day. Karma's a bitch, man. And he's my loser because I just think that was the poorest showing of sportsmanship I've seen in Formula One in a really long time.
Our honorable mention this week is KMag. While the race may have not turned out how we wanted it to, doesn't mean that there's not so much for him to celebrate, really for the whole Haas team to celebrate. The only person who I don't think will be celebrating is Mick Schumacher, but it was a great moment for the team. And if anything, it brings me hope that while they might not be the strongest car on the grid, it is clear that they are able to capitalize at moments and bring a spoon when everyone else brings a fork to a knife fight. I don't know. All the food utensil metaphors.
All right, everyone, get your tissues. Get your box of tissues. Get them out. Get them ready. Get your personalized handkerchiefs. Get your water bottles to rehydrate after we bawl our eyes out, because next weekend is our last Sebastian Vettel Grand Prix. And it's also the end to Danny Rick's current run in Formula One.
Also, someone just sent me a tweet from a Ferrari news Twitter account that said, according to a reputed Italian newspaper, Gazzetta, Mattia Binotto will be replaced by Frederick Vasseur. So that is some news that we may or may not be getting confirmation on later today. So keep an eye out for the drama at Ferrari. It might end up that next weekend is also saying goodbye to Matteo. Up next is the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix at the Yas Marina Circuit. The 58-lap race takes place this weekend for the last race of the year. The first Grand Prix was hosted in 2009, and it debuted as the year's season finale with Sebastian Vettel winning. So, repeat? Question mark? Donuts? Question mark? The track is dominated by a 1.2 kilometer straight between turns 5 and turn 6. Last year, ahead of the Grand Prix, there was massive track modifications that led to a slightly more interesting race. Let's see what this year has to offer in terms of overtaking and on-track moves, as that was the genesis for those track modifications. There is no way that we can go into this weekend's race without really thinking about and remembering the consequences of last year's race, when Hamilton and Verstappen went into the race tied and left the race with the human error and not tied to end the season. This year is slightly different, but slightly the same, with Checo and Charles going into the weekend tied at 290 points for P2 in the constructors. The question is, who's going to be P2 after this weekend? Join us next week for the race recap to find out.
Thank you so much for listening to another episode. Don't forget to subscribe and follow us at Dirty Driving Pod on Twitter and Instagram.
Until next time, stay dirty.